stay for Liza Grandia's performance, and we hope to see you tomorrow morning as well. Thank you so much.
Hello, I hope you can see my screen. Is everything all right?
Yes. Yes. Liza Grandia is at UC Davis and is going to be performing as Professor Canary today.
Yes, good afternoon, good evening. I am here with my beloved crested canary, Bernie, named for, well, you know, Bernie Sanders, because you can sort of see the resemblance. And I am Professor Canary, and I have a lesson today together with Bernie in vulnerability in the mineshaft of modernity. If you would, please close your eyes and imagine pollution. Now, I reckon most of you probably conjured up images of smokestacks and tailpipes, or perhaps plastics in the ocean, scenes of outdoor pollution, when in fact, the indoor air in which we spend 90% of our lives is probably 2 to 5 times more polluted than even the smoggiest cities. And the average household dust contains flame retardants, PCBs, PFAS, numerous pesticides. You will routinely find residues of DDT in carpet dust, although it was banned more than 50 years ago. So in addition to what we inhale and ingest from indoor air, we're also slathering chemicals on our bodies. On average, women apply 168 chemicals daily to their skin and hair just before breakfast. Most of these contain synthetic fragrances concocted from some 3,000 petrochemical derivatives. But because, like natural flavors in industrial food, corporations can avoid disclosure by claiming these are trade secrets, we don't really know what is in them. Now, a lot of people who really, to me, reek like petroleum barrels because of their perfumed products insist, but I only put on a little, or I don't wear perfume. But most folks are cloaked in synthetic laundry scents, which we're breathing 24 hours, 7 days a week, from birth until death, in pajamas, sheets, clothes, coats, and more. And these days during the pandemic, washing the masks that people are wearing all day long in these synthetic fragrances. So let's look at some of the fun stuff in fabric softener. Now, if sold separately, many of the ingredients the EPA would classify as hazardous waste and require a skull and crossbone warning. I'll let that sink in a moment. And yes, they also contain chloroform, the murder weapon of so many Agatha Christie murder mysteries and Hollywood noir. And they invariably off-gas formaldehyde. Yes, the industrial solvent, also famous for embalming bodies and a well-known carcinogen. So much of humanity is now basically walking and sleeping in our own personal clouds of embalming fluid. And for years, formaldehyde was a known ingredient in Johnson & Johnson's iconic baby shampoo that I know that I used as a child through adulthood. And even after Johnson & Johnson removed it from bottles sold in the European Union, they continued selling it in the United States. And as you can see from the email I received back from the company, the legal parsing of, well, we don't actually add formaldehyde to our products, but we use what are known as formaldehyde-releasing preservatives. And this is also the company that put asbestos in baby talc. And to cover up that horrific new baby smell, they actually profitably market a baby cologne with a warning label that says, do not use without consulting a doctor if your child has asthma. Serious breathing problems could occur. Now, like other fragrances, we know that these likely contain undisclosed plasticizers known as phthalates, on which the fragrance molecules are placed in order to waft longer and stronger. And phthalates have been conclusively proven to disrupt neurological and hormonal development in children. So like you, I was once oblivious to these dangers. As a poor graduate student in Berkeley in the early 2000s, I just bought the cheapest brand of Suave shampoo at the grocery outlet and wondered why I had chronic sinus infections. Things like phthalates, volatile organic compounds, acetylcholinesterase inhibitors had not yet entered my vocabulary. But I do distinctly remember going into a doctor's office in Berkeley and seeing a fragrance-free sign for the first time. And I was puzzled, and I came home and dialed up my little modem, telephone modem back in the day, and learned that those notices were for people who were disabled by multiple chemical sensitivities, or MCS. I'd never heard of it, but I distinctly remember feeling a surge of pity and wondering, gosh, how can they cope with modern life? I never imagined it would happen to me. Then, after going through chemotherapy very unexpectedly at the tender age of 35, right after field work, my body decided it had had enough chemical exposures for a lifetime. And so other people's, not my perfume, but other people's perfumes began to give me shiny migraines, swollen lymph nodes, brain fog, asthma, bone marrow pain, anxiety, and a whole lot more that I don't need to go into today. And because of the cognitive impacts, I was initially ashamed of the MCS and my Southern manners. I'm here amongst the quilts that my mama, made by hand. I'm from the deep South, and my Southern manners prevented me from just talking to people and asking them to abstain from fragrances. But I came to learn over time that chemical sensitivity is far more prevalent than imagined. One of the folk heroes of our community is a civil engineer from Australia, Anne Steinemann, who has done these enormous cross-country surveys and has found that roughly a third of the general population actually in surveys will say that they find synthetic fragrances cloying or unpleasant, and about 15 or 20% with asthma and allergies find them far more irritating. And initially, those of us with MCS were only 1 to 2% of the population. Those rates have risen to somewhere between 7 and 10% today. She's been tracking this over time, and it's been a really dramatic surge. So you have to know what's happening in our environment. So hey, Bernie, did you know that back in the day when the chemical industry was painting us as hysterical women, that just making this up, Bernie Sanders was the first politician to actually advocate for people with MCS, as a number of his constituents had been permanently sickened by toxic carpet and developed chemical sensitivities from that. And despite the prevalence, right, so many people suffering in silence, fragrances are everywhere. In Glade is in packaging now, in garbage bags. I can't tell you the bane of my existence, finding a decent garbage bag that isn't fragranced. McDonald's with candles to smell like quarter pounders. Dish detergent engineered to smell like a Texas rodeo. Annual reports that come scented. I mean, scented scissors, what in the world? And now you can douse and poison your wedding guest through personalized scents that will waft through the venue. All right, now to cut through this madness, Ken Cook, the director of a nonprofit called the Environmental Working Group, had an epiphany in 1998 that if people actually knew what was inside them, especially mothers, they might begin to think differently about pollution standards and indoor hazards. So his organization began developing low-cost biomonitoring protocols to screen everyday citizens for a portfolio of 200 chemicals. There are about 85,000 chemicals in commerce, so they started with 200. In what became known as the Toxome Project, kind of play on the human genome, they started testing volunteers, including PBS's renowned journalist, Bill Moyers, and other high-profile folk in that first wave of testing. And most of them had somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the 200 chemicals in the test slate in their blood at any time. So the CDC and the EU replicated these results and found almost universal exposure to flame retardants, polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, that are much in the news today, these forever chemicals used to make Teflon, and that people that fear may be making the COVID vaccines less effective, VOCs, bisphenol A, and more. Now, at the time, though, that these initial body burden studies came out, people still thought that the placenta was an effective barrier to pollutants and that babies were protected. And so Environmental Working Group shocked the world with another study on hundreds of toxicants they found in cord blood. The scandal of babies being born pre-polluted actually led the European Parliament to overhaul completely its risk assessment and registration process to place the burden of industry to prove safety. But elsewhere, and especially here in the United States, chemicals are considered safe until enough bodies pile up to prove them guilty. And so of the estimated 85,000 chemicals released into the environment in the 20th century, less than 10% have been scrutinized for basic toxicity. You know, if you inject them into rats, well, half of them die. And less than 2% tested for carcinogenicity, much less the dozens of other health effects that we know that humanity is suffering from chemical exposure. So if paranoia is the crazy idea that people are out to get you, and they aren't, I think with regard to toxics, people instead suffer from trustanoia, a term coined by anthropologist Laura Nader to describe the crazy idea that people think that someone's out to protect you when they really aren't. Our regulatory system for toxics was stillborn. To avoid corporate opposition, the Toxics Control Substance Act of 1976 grandfathered into law, just rubber stamped the 62,000 chemicals already on the market without further study. And today, 95% of them still remain totally unstudied for even basic toxicity. Given that, you might guess how many substances has the EPA managed to ban in its 50-year history? 6, though actually it's 5. Because after the EPA banned asbestos, a known carcinogen in 1989, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned the ruling in 1991, and a demoralized EPA since 1991 hasn't managed to ban a single chemical. Any minor regulation is based on studies volunteered by industry, and EPA itself admits that 85% of pesticide applications presented by agribusiness contain no human health data at all. So basically, the fox is guarding the henhouse. The FDA isn't doing much better. Its office that's supposed to oversee the cosmetics industry, a $70 billion industry, I should say that in a Bernie tone, $70 billion industry, only has 27 staff members. And an $8 million budget. So of the estimated 13,000 chemicals put in very personal products, only about 10% of those have been evaluated for safety. The EU is doing a little bit better in terms of regulation. They've prohibited over 1,000 chemicals, the FDA merely 11. So not surprisingly, in the US today, 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will develop cancer in their lifetimes. While just 1 in 20 women in 1960 were likely to develop breast cancer, the risk has increased to 1 in 8 and continues to fall. Pediatric cancer has risen by 50% over the last 3 decades and is the second leading cause of death for children under 15. And worldwide, the number of new cancer diagnoses is expected to increase 45% between 2008 and 2030. And that estimated annual deaths, about 9.5 million these days, is 4 times the number of people who die annually from malaria, tuberculosis, and AIDS combined. Are Bill Gates or any of the health philanthropists investing in research on the causes of cancer and environmental illness? No. It's not just cancer. I wonder if any of you might guess what this graph illustrates. Men, sperm counts have fallen by half since monitoring began with soldiers in the world wars and have continued to fall since 1990 precipitously. And endocrinologists believe that this is in relationship to exposures to bisphenol A and other endocrine disruptors in plastics. The warnings from children are alarming. You know, pound for pound, children breathe more air, drink more water, absorb more chemicals, and in particular, put their hands in their mouths all the time, right? So they're constantly ingesting way more than we are as adults. but they're all the more vulnerable because their kidneys and livers are not yet fully developed into adulthood, and they don't yet have a complete blood-brain barrier. So the problems are mounting, right? Early puberty, asthma rates that have doubled since 1980, a rise in ADHD, other autoimmune diseases, and in particular, as I've mentioned, a rise in childhood cancers, brain cancer, leukemia, and so on. So this was, hey, Bernie, thanks for the commentary. It's really terrible. You know, this wasn't really what I ever set out to study. I was, you know, anthropology's classic anthropologist. I learned a Maya language, 7 years of field work. And then, you know, I studied up and I was merrily slaying World Bank projects with a single hand out of slow, grounded ethnography that I've written about. The value of that and how grateful I am that I had that time. But then my second semester as a professor, this happened, right? And it's been uphill ever since. Through a brutal chemotherapy, I had nothing better to do than to begin researching the causes of cancer, or what I might call oncopology, with myself as a subject. And I just happened to get a cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, that's clearly associated with herbicide exposure, and also to other environmental exposures, possibly toxic carpet in my university building, or all of the above. Now, I can talk a mile about toxic carpet, and I have been known to ruin quite a number of good first dates doing so. So I will spare you today the carpet discourse, but I have started writing up that history and the data, and I would encourage you to look at a report, because we are surrounded by carpet in our workplaces and our homes, that was put out in 2017 by the Healthy Building Network, an expose on 44 hazardous substances found in so-called green label carpet, including mercury, arsenic, and lead, because it's an open secret that the carpet industry uses coal fly ash as filler. Okay, skip ahead a few years, and you know, I have to say, believe me, hell hath no fury when the miracle child of a cancer survivor comes home sick from the new carpet in her second grade classroom and looks like this every day. So other children were sick in our Mexican-American school, and in the struggle to remove the carpet from the schools, Professor Canary was born, and walked down Main Street, attended school board meetings, began to appear on campus, and beyond on the internet. Now, I think more popular and journalistic representations of MCS have often profiled the extremes, right? People banished to desert communities, or trapped in foiled and ventilated bedrooms. But through my public Professor Canary character, I want to give a face to the millions who remain in limbo between home exclusion and debilitating adventures into everyday society and employment. We are, as Membe put it, much like colonized bodies, kept alive, but in a state of injury. Now, apparently I learned later from a student that in the Marvel series there's a villain canary, but I'm a friendly canary. I just smell things that other people don't. And believe me, I would give back this superpower if I could. But since I can't, I wanted to understand what was happening to me, why I smelled things at a magnified level. And I was fortunate to have received a Mellon Foundation New Directions Fellowship in 2017 that put some organic chemistry into my canary song. So why canaries? You know, I knew that birds had proven their charismatic mettle as sentinel creatures, and not many people know, but Rachel Carson wrote her book while she was dying of breast cancer. And with the simple story of DDT and fragile eagle eggs, she broke US enchantment with chemical living. And so, you know, to give a very brief history of the canaries and how this lovely ended up in my living room. In the 17th century, Spanish sailors brought the songbirds back to Europe. Monks bred them for the royalty, and they were, but eventually made their way out to common folk. Then mining companies began purchasing the less operatic female birds that don't sing as pit canaries for their workers. Because their 4-chambered lung structure, canaries inhale 4 times the amount of air as humans per body weight of body mass. And so they could serve as an early warning of the buildup of carbon monoxide, you know, a fatal but odorless gas. So if canaries wobbled on their perches, they warned the miners that conditions were unsafe and gave the miners about 20 minutes to get out. To my own, I always imagine kind of slaughtered canaries, but to my surprise and delight in doing this research, I learned that the sacrifice of mining canaries is more urban legend than actual proletarian history. Yes, it's very good, Bernie. Miners cared dutifully, even lovingly, for their occupational pets. They had sophisticated resealable cages with oxygen bottles to resuscitate them after signs of distress. So as you can see, online communities and other networks of people injured by chemicals have embraced the symbolism. I think we just want to have some meaning in our suffering. And so in coming out of the closet, for me, it's been a way to start conversations about intimate questions of risk and hazard, per Mary Douglas, about toxics in everyday life, our sense of pollution, our cultural sense of pollution. And for me, it's been a matter of survival. You know, after stammering through so many lectures and a brain fog, I just had to begin telling students. And what I found extraordinary is that how many of them have confessed to me in my office hours that they don't like perfumes. I remember in particular one young man who stopped wearing fragrances out of respect for me, and then he realized he could concentrate better. And then he went off his ADHD meds. It turns out he didn't have concentration problems at all, just a very bad case of cologne. So believe me, I would rather be in the rainforest working on climate change, but through these everyday conversations, I suddenly realized that I stopped mourning the loss of field work and realized that I was doing field work again. But also a new form of citizen science that I hope will push environmental justice in new directions. Because I think the universality and multiplicity of exposures make it really difficult for humanity to sort out causality. But early distrust for the distress signals of canaries, or what I call canary science, I think can move environmental epidemiological research in new directions. Because polluted communities and chemically sensitive folk perceive toxic harms in intuitive and sensorial ways that are missed by scientists. So alongside the melting of glaciers, human bodies like mine warn of another planetary crisis that also has its roots in petroleum. And even if we detox today, transgenerational epigenetic research suggests that the full scope of humanity's chemical habits have yet to unfold. So in this, I echo Greta. As a cancer survivor, I don't want your hope or congratulations. I want you to panic and act as if the house was on fire before it's too late. And so I'm here in this ridiculous getup. You know, my attunement is a skill. And if you'll forgive mixed metaphors, I'm a canary, not a sacrificial lamb. So I need to live to work another day. So please go home and scour your labels for fragrances, if not for us, then for yourselves. And while time won't permit a discussion of alternatives, I think Environmental Working Group is also one of the best sources for rankings on fragrance-free cleaning and personal care products and pesticides in produce. Do it today. Because I'm not saying your perfume is too strong. I'm just saying the canary was alive before you got here. You've been warned. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Liza. This was amazing. There's one question in the one comment in the chat, and I think I'll read that out loud and hope, and then I think perhaps we need to conclude our session for today. Caitlin McMillan says, "Thank you so much, Liza, for this work. MSC is a condition my mother has lived with for the last 10 years. One of the most difficult things alongside living with MCS is that people often don't believe her or choose to turn away. And I've seen how her and others with the condition are ostracized. I'll show her your presentation. Thank you again for bringing awareness to MCS and your creative work on it."
Thanks. I guess I'll just add, I use the more well-known term today of multiple chemical sensitivity, but you know, that can raise the question about whether it's the fault of the individual for being too sensitive. And so Claudia Miller, an MD at the University of Texas, has reframed this to toxicant-induced loss of tolerance, or TILT. And I found it very interesting when I was doing my toxicology studies. I was actually quite nervous about telling, my colleagues, the toxicologists, that, about my sensitivities, because I thought they would ridicule me. I thought that still the idea that the dose is the poison. And I think I was surprised and delighted how much the field is changing and recognizing the hazards of low dose exposures. And what was even more amazing is that almost all the toxicologists I met, whether it was from their own laboratory chemicals or just awareness of possibilities of effects of exposure, all described to me as also hating fragrances. But they didn't want to take on the term MCS, chemical sensitivity, right? Which still had a stigma to it. But the term TILT, toxicant induced, right? It externalizes the causes, right? Exposure over time or exposure to a large event can just, make people's bodies go haywire. And so I'm actually working now with a couple of colleagues, the head of public health and epidemiology at Davis and the head of the toxicology department. And we are working on measuring the fragrance prevalence amongst the campus community. So I like to joke, there's a toxicologist and an epidemiologist and an anthropologist go into a bar. It's really been a delight to work with them. But of course we wouldn't go into a bar because it would just be too smelly. So in all this, I really do think I'm trying to use a sense of humor because the toxicology is pretty grim. And if I have to be goofy to sort of break through people's sense of normality, I will do that.
Thank you so much, Liza. We're going to end today's panels here now, and we're looking forward to welcoming you back tomorrow morning. We start again at 10:30 a.m. East Coast time with Denlon Rutherford's presentation. We're excited to see you back tomorrow morning, and please email us if you have any questions about logistics or anything else. And just a note before I turn off the webinar, all the presentations will be available on our website in the next few days. We've recorded them all and we're going to be making them available and posting them on our website. Thank you.